The champagne glasses still sat unwashed in the kitchen sink when Michael Carter drove his white Toyota Camry into the parking lot of the Sheraton Hotel on North Central Expressway in Dallas, Texas, carrying a loaded Glock 19 inches, his jacket pocket, and a marriage certificate that was exactly 7 days old, about to commit a double homicide that would transform a story of newlywed bliss into one of the most chilling crimes of passion in recent Dallas history. Marie-Claire Jean-Baptiste had arrived in America 8 years earlier, with dreams woven from threads of hope and desperation that characterized so many young Haitian women who left Port-au-Prince seeking opportunities that simply did not exist in a country still recovering from devastating earthquakes and political instability that had defined her childhood. The nursing assistant position at Methodist Dallas Medical Center represented more than just employment for the vibrant 27-year-old woman whose warm smile and natural charisma had made her beloved among patients and colleagues who knew nothing of the internal conflicts that tore at her heart daily as she navigated the complex terrain between duty to her conservative family back home and her personal desire for the kind of freedom and passion that American life seemed to promise but cultural expectations threatened to deny. The wedding ceremony that had taken place exactly 1 week before the murders was held at a small Baptist church in Oak Cliff, attended by approximately 80 guests who witnessed the union between Marie-Claire and Michael Carter, a 32-year-old IT specialist whose reserved demeanor and calculated approach to life seemed to promise the stability and security that Marie-Claire's family desperately wanted for their daughter, who had sacrificed so much to build a life in this foreign country, where success was measured in dollars sent home and the quality of husband one could secure. Michael Carter had grown up in a strict military household in Houston, where his father, a retired Army colonel, had instilled values of discipline, pride, and absolute loyalty that shaped every aspect of his personality and worldview, creating a man who approached relationships with the same rigid expectations and perfectionist standards that governed his professional life as an IT specialist at one of Houston's major oil companies, where attention to detail and systematic problem-solving were valued above creativity or emotional expression. The attraction between Marie-Claire and Michael had developed over 6 months of careful courtship that began when they met at a mutual friend's barbecue in Dallas, where Michael had been immediately drawn to her exotic beauty and warm personality, while she saw in him the kind of stable, educated, professional man who could validate her decision to leave Haiti and provide the financial security that would allow her to continue supporting her family back home, including her younger sister Nadine, who dreamed of following in her footsteps by immigrating to America for educational opportunities that simply did not exist in Port-au-Prince. What neither Michael nor Marie-Claire's family knew was that she had maintained a complicated romantic history with Daniel Brooks, a 29-year-old personal trainer from Austin, whose charismatic personality and athletic build represented everything that Michael was not: spontaneous where Michael was calculated, passionate where Michael was reserved, exciting where Michael was predictable, creating a dangerous attraction that Marie-Claire had tried to suppress during her courtship and engagement, but found impossible to resist once the reality of married life began to settle in during that first week of what was supposed to be a lifetime commitment. Daniel Brooks had built a reputation in Austin's social scene as someone who enjoyed the attention of women without the complications of commitment, operating a successful personal training business that gave him flexible hours and constant access to attractive clients who appreciated his charm and physique while remaining largely unaware of his pattern of pursuing unavailable women, who represented challenges to his ego and opportunities to validate his attractiveness without the obligations of serious relationships that might restrict his freedom or force him to confront his own emotional limitations. The affair between Marie-Claire and Daniel had first developed 18 months before her marriage to Michael, during a period when she was feeling particularly isolated from her family and uncertain about her future in America, finding in Daniel's attention and physical passion a temporary escape from the pressures of her nursing job and the constant financial demands from relatives in Haiti, who saw her as their lifeline to prosperity without fully understanding the sacrifices and challenges of her daily existence in a country where she would always be perceived as foreign, despite her best efforts at assimilation. The relationship with Daniel had ended badly 6 months before Marie-Claire met Michael, terminated by her recognition that his refusal to commit to anything serious would never provide the kind of stability and family validation she needed, leading her to deliberately seek out the kind of responsible, established man who could offer marriage and respectability, even if he could not provide the intense passion and excitement that Daniel had brought to her life during their tumultuous months together. The wedding night between Marie-Claire and Michael had been awkward and disappointing, marked by his mechanical approach to intimacy and her inability to feel the kind of connection she had experienced with Daniel, creating immediate doubts about her decision to marry for stability rather than passion, while also generating guilt about her inability to appreciate the genuine affection and commitment that Michael was offering, based on his own understanding of what marriage should represent. The text message that would ultimately lead to 2 deaths arrived on Marie-Claire's phone 3 days after the wedding, sent by Daniel from Austin with a simple question about whether she was happy in her marriage, opening a door that she knew she should keep closed, but found herself unable to resist, as memories of their physical chemistry and emotional intensity flooded back with unexpected force, overwhelming her rational understanding of the risks involved in reconnecting with someone who represented everything she had tried to leave behind when she accepted Michael's proposal. The decision to meet Daniel at the Sheraton Hotel came after 2 days of increasingly intimate text exchanges that rekindled their attraction, while also revealing that he was willing to drive to Dallas specifically to see her, flattering her ego and awakening desires that her brief marriage had failed to satisfy, creating a dangerous situation where her immediate emotional and physical needs overwhelmed her understanding of the devastating consequences that discovery would bring to her marriage, her reputation, and her family's hopes for her success in America. Michael Carter's discovery of his wife's infidelity came through the kind of systematic surveillance and investigation that characterized his approach to problem-solving in his professional life, beginning with his observation of suspicious behavior patterns in Marie-Claire's phone usage and emotional distance during their first week of marriage, triggering his decision to install tracking software on her device that revealed not only the text exchanges with Daniel but also the planned meeting at the Sheraton Hotel that would become the site of a double murder. The psychological collapse that Michael experienced upon confirming his wife's betrayal was absolute and devastating, shattering his carefully constructed worldview, where loyalty and commitment were non-negotiable values that justified his decision to marry and invest emotionally in someone he had believed shared his understanding of what marriage vows represented, transforming his perception of Marie-Claire from beloved wife into enemy combatant who had violated sacred trust during the first week of their union, when bonds should have been strongest and commitment most absolute. The purchase of the Glock 19 handgun occurred 24 hours before the murders, acquired through a private sale that required no waiting period or background check beyond Michael's existing license to carry, representing his calculated decision to eliminate both his wife and her lover in a way that would satisfy his need for justice, while also ending the humiliation and pain that their betrayal had inflicted on his pride and his vision of the future he had planned so carefully. The drive from Michael and Marie-Claire's apartment in North Dallas to the Sheraton Hotel took 17 minutes through afternoon traffic, during which Michael later testified he felt a strange sense of calm and purpose that contrasted sharply with the emotional chaos of the previous 24 hours since confirming the planned affair, as if the decision to commit murder had resolved his internal conflict by providing a clear course of action that aligned with his rigid value system regarding loyalty and betrayal. The hotel security cameras captured Michael Carter's arrival at 2:47 in the afternoon on a humid Tuesday in late June, showing a tall man in business, casual attire walking with apparent purpose through the lobby toward the elevators, his right hand in his jacket pocket where the loaded Glock 19 weighted with 15 rounds of 9mm ammunition that represented his calculated response to a betrayal he considered unforgivable and deserving of the ultimate punishment. Marie-Claire had arrived 30 minutes earlier, captured by the same security system as she checked in using a credit card that Michael did not monitor, booking room 412 under her maiden name of Jean-Baptiste in an attempt at discretion that proved tragically inadequate, given her husband's systematic approach to surveillance and his determination to catch her in the act of infidelity that would justify the violent response he had been planning since the previous evening. Daniel Brooks had driven from Austin that morning, a 200-mile journey undertaken specifically for the purpose of rekindling his affair with Marie-Claire, whose married status added an element of danger and excitement that appealed to his appetite for risk and his tendency to pursue women who represented challenges to his ego rather than opportunities for genuine emotional connection or long-term relationship development. The text exchange between Marie-Claire and Daniel during the 30 minutes before Michael's arrival revealed their excitement about reuniting and their complete lack of awareness regarding the surveillance that had exposed their plans, with messages discussing physical desire and memories of their previous relationship, while also expressing no apparent guilt or concern about the betrayal of Marie-Claire's week-old marriage vows or the potential consequences of discovery by a husband they had both underestimated. The elevator ride to the 4th floor gave Michael approximately 45 seconds to reconsider his planned actions, though later testimony from his defense attorneys and psychological experts would suggest that by this point his mental state had deteriorated into a kind of dissociative rage, where his actions felt inevitable and justified by a moral code that demanded absolute loyalty and prescribed death as appropriate punishment for betrayal that violated the sacred bonds of marriage barely 7 days after their establishment. The hallway on the 4th floor was empty when Michael approached room 412, his footsteps silent on industrial carpeting, as he used the duplicate keycard he had obtained from hotel security by claiming to be Marie-Claire's husband who needed access to their room, a lie that was technically true in the most tragic sense, while also demonstrating the systematic planning and deception that characterized his approach to the murders he was about to commit. The sound of laughter and intimate conversation from inside the room was audible through the door before Michael inserted the keycard, providing final confirmation of the affair while also triggering the complete psychological break that transformed him from betrayed husband into killer, unleashing violence that had been building since his discovery of the text messages that revealed the extent of Marie-Claire's deception during the first week of their marriage. The hotel room door opened silently on well-maintained hinges, revealing Marie-Claire and Daniel on the bed in a state of partial undress that left no doubt about the nature of their meeting, creating a tableau that Michael later described as the moment when his old life ended and something new and terrible took control of his actions in response to a betrayal that he experienced as equivalent to a physical attack on his identity and self-worth. The first shot struck Daniel Brooks in the chest as he attempted to stand up from the bed, the 9mm round entering above his heart and causing catastrophic damage to vital organs, while also generating the kind of immediate shock and blood loss that rendered him unable to defend himself or Marie-Claire from the systematic execution that followed with mechanical precision. Marie-Claire's scream echoed through the 4th floor hallway as Michael approached the bed where she had scrambled backward against the headboard, her hands raised in a futile defensive gesture while she begged for mercy and attempted to explain or justify the affair that had brought them to this moment of irreversible violence and destruction. The second shot struck Marie-Claire in the throat, silencing her pleas while causing massive bleeding that would prove fatal within minutes, despite the desperate attempts of hotel staff and emergency responders who arrived after other guests called 911 to report sounds of gunfire and screaming from room 412. The third and fourth shots were fired into Daniel Brooks as he lay dying on the floor beside the bed, representing Michael's determination to ensure both lovers were dead rather than merely wounded, eliminating any possibility of their survival and testimony about the circumstances that had led to his violent response to their betrayal of his trust and marriage vows. The fifth shot struck Marie-Claire in the chest as she attempted to crawl toward the bathroom, her movements growing weaker from blood loss, while Michael maintained the kind of cold focus that characterized his professional approach to technical problems, treating the murders as challenges, requiring systematic solutions rather than human tragedies involving people he had once loved or at least claimed to value. The silence that followed the final gunshot was broken only by Michael's heavy breathing and the sounds of approaching footsteps in the hallway as hotel security and the first police officers responded to the active shooter situation that had transformed the Sheraton Hotel into a crime scene that would dominate Dallas news coverage for weeks, while generating national attention to the phenomenon of newlywed murders and crimes of passion involving recent immigrants whose complex cultural backgrounds and relationship dynamics challenged simple explanations. The surrender occurred without additional violence, When Dallas police officers entered the hotel room with weapons drawn, finding Michael seated calmly on a chair near the window with the Glock 19 placed carefully on the desk beside him, his hands raised in compliance with commands, while his expression showed a disturbing combination of relief and satisfaction that suggested he felt justice had been served through his execution of the two people who had betrayed his trust during the first week of his marriage. The crime scene investigation at the Sheraton Hotel required 6 hours of meticulous documentation by Dallas Police Department forensic specialists who photographed and cataloged evidence that painted a devastating picture of premeditated murder executed with military precision by a man whose rigid personality and strict upbringing had created psychological vulnerabilities that manifested in lethal violence when confronted with betrayal during the most vulnerable period of his marriage. Detective Sarah Mitchell arrived at the scene 30 minutes after the shooting, her 15 years of homicide investigation experience immediately recognizing the pattern of execution-style murders that suggested calculation rather than spontaneous rage. Though the emotional context of newlywed betrayal added layers of complexity that would require extensive investigation into the psychological dynamics and relationship history of all three individuals whose lives had intersected so tragically. The forensic evidence recovered from room 412 included 5 spent 9mm shell casings arranged in a pattern that reconstructed Michael's movements through the space as he systematically shot both victims multiple times. The blood spatter analysis revealing details about positioning and sequence that would prove crucial during trial proceedings where defense attorneys would attempt to argue temporary insanity or emotional disturbance that diminished his culpability for premeditated murder. Marie Claire's cell phone provided investigators with the complete text message history between her and Daniel Brooks, revealing not only the rekindled affair, but also her apparent lack of concern about the risks involved in meeting him so soon after her marriage, creating prosecution evidence of betrayal that would complicate public sympathy for the victim, while also reinforcing defense arguments about provocation and emotional disturbance that allegedly compromised Michael's judgment and impulse control. The interview with Michael Carter at Dallas Police Headquarters began at 7:30 that evening, conducted by Detective Mitchell and her partner Detective James Rodriguez in a small interrogation room where the accused killer showed remarkable composure and coherence while describing his discovery of the affair and his decision to murder both his wife and her lover as a response to betrayal that he characterized as justifiable homicide, deserving understanding, if not complete legal exoneration. The confession that Michael provided was detailed and unapologetic, describing his installation of tracking software on Marie Claire's phone, his monitoring of her communications with Daniel Brooks, his discovery of their planned meeting at the Sheraton Hotel, his purchase of the firearm, and his execution of both individuals, in what he described as necessary punishment for their violation of sacred marriage vows and their disrespect for his commitment and trust during the first week of their union. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court revealed a complex personality structure characterized by rigid thinking patterns, perfectionism, deep-seated insecurity masked by outward confidence, and a tendency toward black and white moral reasoning that left no room for forgiveness or nuanced understanding of human weakness and emotional complexity in relationships that rarely conform to idealized expectations or rigid value systems. The background investigation into Michael's childhood and family history revealed a pattern of emotional repression and strict discipline imposed by his father. The retired Army colonel, whose military values and authoritarian parenting style had created a son who internalized impossible standards for loyalty and performance while developing limited capacity for emotional flexibility or acceptance of human imperfection in himself or others. The interview with Linda Carter, Michael's 60-year-old mother, revealed a woman struggling to reconcile the son she knew as responsible and disciplined with the killer who had executed 2 people in a hotel room, her defense of his character competing with her horror at his actions, while also exposing family dynamics where emotional vulnerability had been systematically suppressed in favor of stoic endurance and rigid self-control. The investigation into Marie Claire's background required coordination with Haitian authorities and interviews with family members in Port-au-Prince, revealing a young woman who had experienced significant pressure to succeed in America and validate her family's sacrifices, while also struggling with her own desires for passion and freedom that conflicted with conservative cultural expectations and the practical need for stable marriage to a successful man. The interview with Nadine Jean-Baptiste, Marie Claire's 25-year-old sister, was conducted via video call to Haiti, revealing the devastating impact of the murder on a family who had invested their hopes and limited resources in Marie Claire's success, their grief compounded by shame about the affair that had precipitated her death and confusion about how to process the complex emotions surrounding a tragedy that seemed both senseless and somehow connected to cultural conflicts about arranged marriage and female autonomy. The background investigation into Daniel Brooks revealed a pattern of casual relationships and emotional unavailability that characterized his approach to women as sources of validation rather than opportunities for genuine connection. His personal training business, serving as vehicle for meeting attractive clients, while his refusal to commit to serious relationships protected him from vulnerability, while also preventing the kind of emotional growth that might have helped him recognize the danger in pursuing a married woman whose husband showed signs of possessive instability. The forensic analysis of Michael's computer and phone revealed extensive research into surveillance technology and murder methods during the week, following his discovery of Marie Claire's plans to meet Daniel, demonstrating premeditation that would prove crucial for prosecution arguments against defense claims of temporary insanity or sudden passion that allegedly eliminated his capacity for rational decision-making at the moment of the killings. The witness interviews with hotel staff and guests revealed that Michael had appeared calm and purposeful when entering the building, contradicting defense theories about dissociative rage or impaired consciousness that might have diminished his legal culpability for murders that appeared to have been executed with systematic precision rather than uncontrolled emotional explosion. The medical examiner's reports confirmed that both victims had died from gunshot wounds, with Marie Claire surviving approximately 8 minutes after the initial shot to her throat, while Daniel had died almost instantly from the chest wound that destroyed his heart and lungs. The additional shots fired into both bodies, representing what prosecutors characterized as overkill that demonstrated rage and intent to ensure death rather than defensive shooting or impulsive violence. The criminal charges filed against Michael Carter included 2 counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances involving premeditation and lying in wait, carrying potential sentences of life imprisonment without possibility of parole or even death penalty consideration, given the calculated nature of the killings and the aggravating factors of spousal murder and execution-style violence that demonstrated particular depravity and disregard for human life. The defense team assembled by Michael's family included 2 experienced criminal attorneys from Houston, Marcus Williams and Jennifer Chen, who specialized in murder cases involving emotional disturbance and crimes of passion, their strategy focusing on temporary insanity arguments, while also attempting to generate sympathy through evidence of Marie Claire's betrayal and the devastating psychological impact of discovering infidelity during the first week of marriage. The prosecution team, led by Dallas County Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Thompson, prepared a comprehensive case built around premeditation evidence, systematic planning, and the cold execution-style nature of the murders that contradicted defense claims about impaired judgment or emotional disturbance that allegedly compromised Michael's capacity for rational decision-making at the time of the killings. The pretrial hearings addressed numerous evidentiary issues, including admissibility of Marie Claire's text messages with Daniel Brooks, the psychological evaluations of Michael's mental state, and the testimony of expert witnesses who would offer competing interpretations of the defendant's capacity for rational judgment and impulse control during the critical period between discovering the affair and executing the murders. The media coverage of the case divided public opinion between those who expressed sympathy for Michael as betrayed husband and those who condemned his violence as inexcusable regardless of provocation, creating intense debate about marriage, fidelity, gender dynamics, and the extent to which emotional provocation should mitigate culpability for calculated murder of intimate partners who violate relationship expectations. The jury selection process required 2 weeks of intensive voir dire to identify 12 individuals who could evaluate evidence objectively, despite strong personal opinions about infidelity and crimes of passion, with both prosecution and defense teams carefully assessing potential jurors' backgrounds, relationship experiences, and attitudes toward marriage, betrayal, and the limits of justified violence in response to intimate partner deception. The opening statements presented sharply contrasting narratives about the same events, with prosecution describing Michael as calculating killer who chose murder over divorce when confronted with his wife's betrayal, while defense portrayed him as loving husband, driven temporarily insane by devastating discovery of infidelity that occurred during the most vulnerable period of marriage, when emotional bonds should have been strongest and mutual, commitment most absolute. The testimony of Detective Sarah Mitchell provided the jury with detailed reconstruction of the crime scene and evidence of systematic planning that undermined defense claims about spontaneous emotional reaction. Her professional presentation and extensive experience lending credibility to prosecution arguments about premeditation and calculated execution that characterized Michael's approach to the murders. The forensic evidence presented through expert testimony established the sequence of shots, the positioning of victims and shooter, and the timeline of events that demonstrated Michael's methodical approach to the killings, rather than uncontrolled rage or dissociative state that might have impaired his conscious decision-making and rational understanding of his actions and their consequences. The text messages between Marie Claire and Daniel were read aloud in court, creating uncomfortable moments as intimate communications exposed the depth of their rekindled attraction, while also providing prosecution evidence of betrayal that complicated efforts to generate complete sympathy for victims whose behavior had admittedly violated marriage vows and demonstrated disrespect for Michael's commitment and trust. The testimony of hotel staff described Michael's calm demeanor when entering the building and his apparent purposefulness when approaching the elevators, contradicting defense claims about impaired consciousness or emotional state that allegedly prevented rational decision-making, instead painting picture of man executing carefully planned violence with full awareness of his actions and their likely consequences. The defense presentation of Michael's childhood and family background attempted to generate understanding of the psychological factors that contributed to his rigid personality structure and extreme response to betrayal, with testimony from family members and psychological experts describing the impact of authoritarian parenting and military household culture on his emotional development and capacity for flexibility when confronting situations that violated his deeply held values about loyalty and commitment. The psychiatric testimony for the defense focused on Michael's alleged temporary insanity at the time of the murders, with expert witnesses describing extreme emotional disturbance and dissociative state that allegedly impaired his capacity for rational judgment, though prosecution experts effectively challenged these conclusions by emphasizing the systematic planning and calculated execution that characterized his approach to the killings. The testimony from Linda Carter proved emotionally powerful but legally ineffective. Her description of Michael as loving son and responsible adult, failing to overcome the extensive prosecution evidence of premeditation and the brutal nature of execution-style murders that demonstrated clear awareness, intentionality, rather than impaired consciousness or uncontrolled emotional reaction. The cross-examination of defense experts revealed inconsistencies in temporary insanity arguments, with prosecution attorneys highlighting Michael's detailed confession, his systematic planning in the days before the murders, and his calm surrender to police as evidence of intact rational capacity that undermined claims about dissociative rage or impaired consciousness at the time of the killings. The testimony of neighbors and colleagues described Michael as quiet and controlled individual who showed no signs of violence or emotional instability prior to the murders, complicating defense arguments about long-standing psychological vulnerabilities while reinforcing prosecution portrait of man who made calculated decision to commit murder when confronted with situation that violated his rigid expectations about marriage and loyalty. The prosecution's closing argument emphasized the premeditation, systematic planning, and cold execution that characterized Michael's approach to the murders, with Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Thompson describing him as man who chose violence over divorce when confronted with his wife's betrayal, rejecting all civilized alternatives in favor of lethal revenge that permanently eliminated two human beings whose mistakes, while morally questionable, did not justify death sentences executed without trial or due process. The defense closing argument attempted to generate sympathy by emphasizing Michael's devastating psychological trauma upon discovering betrayal during the first week of marriage, describing him as victim of cruel deception who experienced complete mental breakdown that temporarily destroyed his capacity for rational judgment and impulse control, transforming loving husband into killer through mechanisms of extreme emotional disturbance that warranted understanding, if not complete, legal exoneration. The jury deliberations extended over 4 days of intensive discussion about premeditation, intent, and the extent to which emotional provocation could mitigate Michael's culpability for murders that appeared calculated in planning but emotionally driven in motivation, creating complex legal questions about the boundaries between spontaneous passion and systematic revenge in cases involving intimate partner violence and betrayal. The verdict of guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder was delivered on a Thursday morning in late October, the jury having rejected defense arguments about temporary insanity while accepting prosecution evidence of premeditation and calculated execution that demonstrated Michael's full awareness of his actions and their consequences. His choice to commit murder, representing criminal decision rather than involuntary result of impaired mental state. The reaction to the verdict divided along predictable lines, with victim advocates and women's rights organizations praising the outcome as appropriate accountability for domestic violence regardless of provocation, while some men's rights groups and conservative commentators expressed concern about insufficient consideration of the emotional trauma caused by infidelity and the extent to which betrayal should mitigate culpability for violence that occurred in immediate aftermath of devastating discovery. The victim impact statements presented during the sentencing phase provided devastating accounts of the permanent damage caused by Michael's violence, with Nadine Jean-Baptiste describing via video call from Haiti the destruction of her family's hopes and dreams through her sister's murder, their grief compounded by shame about the affair, while also insisting that Marie Claire's mistakes did not justify execution by husband who claimed to love her. The testimony about Daniel Brooks's impact on his family and community emphasized his positive contributions as personal trainer who had helped numerous clients achieve health goals, while also acknowledging his flawed approach to relationships that ultimately contributed to his presence in the hotel room where he was murdered, his family's grief complicated by anger about choices that placed him in harm's way. The sentencing hearing required 2 days of testimony about aggravating and mitigating factors, with prosecution emphasizing the brutal nature of execution-style killings and the betrayal of marriage vows through spousal murder, while defense highlighted Michael's lack of prior criminal history and the extreme emotional provocation that allegedly explained, if not justified, his violent response to devastating betrayal. The sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole was delivered by Judge Margaret Harrison, who described Michael's crimes as particularly heinous examples of domestic violence that demonstrated complete disregard for human life and civilized responses to relationship conflicts. His systematic planning and cold execution, eliminating any possibility of leniency based on claims about temporary emotional disturbance or impaired judgment. The immediate aftermath of sentencing found Michael being processed into the Texas Department of Criminal Justice system for transfer to a maximum security facility, where he would begin serving his life sentence. His transformation from successful IT professional to convicted murderer complete within 6 months of the wedding that was supposed to represent the beginning of lifelong happiness and shared success. The impact on both families extended far beyond the courtroom, with the Carter family struggling to reconcile their son's violence with their understanding of him as responsible and controlled individual, while the Jean-Baptiste family in Haiti experienced devastating loss of their daughter and sister, whose success in America had represented hope for entire extended family that depended on her financial support and planned to follow her immigration path. The media analysis of the case focused on cultural factors involving arranged marriage expectations, immigrant experiences in America, and the deadly intersection of possessive control and rigid moral codes that allowed no room for human weakness or forgiveness of mistakes, that violated deeply held values about loyalty and commitment in intimate relationships. The legal commentary emphasized the precedent-setting nature of the verdict in rejecting temporary insanity defenses based solely on discovery of spousal infidelity, establishing clearer boundaries around emotional provocation as mitigation for premeditated murder, while also acknowledging the complex psychological dynamics involved in intimate partner violence cases. The psychological research community expressed interest in the case as illustration of how rigid personality structures and authoritarian upbringings could create vulnerabilities to catastrophic reactions when confronted with situations that violated core beliefs and expectations, particularly in context of new marriages, where emotional investment and identity formation were deeply intertwined with partner loyalty. The feminist analysis of the case highlighted patterns of male entitlement and ownership attitudes toward female partners that manifested in lethal violence when women exercised sexual autonomy or violated expectations about exclusive loyalty, viewing Michael's murders as extreme example of domestic violence rooted in patriarchal assumptions about male authority and female subordination in marriage relationships. The conservative commentary on the case expressed concern about moral decline and erosion of marriage sanctity in modern society, using Marie Claire's infidelity as evidence of cultural breakdown, while also struggling to reconcile condemnation of her betrayal with acknowledgement that murder represented unacceptable response regardless of provocation, emotional trauma experienced by betrayed spouse. The prison adjustment period for Michael Carter revealed surprising capacity for institutional adaptation. His disciplined nature and systematic approach to problem-solving translating effectively to the highly structured environment of maximum security incarceration, where routine and rule following were essential for safety and minimal comfort within brutal conditions that would be his permanent reality for the remainder of his life. The psychological counseling provided through the prison system addressed Michael's continued justification of his actions and his apparent lack of genuine remorse for the murders. His rigid moral framework, allowing him to view the killings as appropriate punishment for betrayal rather than criminal acts deserving condemnation, creating therapeutic challenges for counselors attempting to generate insight into the devastating impact of his violence on multiple families and communities. The appeals process initiated by his defense team focused on evidentiary issues and jury instructions regarding temporary insanity standards, though legal experts generally agreed that the strength of prosecution evidence and the systematic nature of the murders made successful appeal unlikely, his conviction and sentence appearing solid based on established legal precedents and the comprehensive nature of the trial record. The media interest in the case gradually diminished as Michael disappeared into the prison system, though periodic anniversary coverage and true crime documentaries continued to examine the case as illustration of newlywed violence and the deadly consequences of rigid personality structures combined with extreme emotional provocation in context of intimate partner betrayal. The impact on the Haitian community in Dallas was significant and lasting, with Marie Claire's murder generating conversations about arranged marriage pressures, cultural expectations around female sexuality and autonomy, and the challenges faced by immigrant women navigating between traditional family values and American notions of individual freedom and romantic choice. The grief counseling provided to Nadine Jean-Baptiste and other family members in Haiti addressed the complex emotions surrounding Marie Claire's death, including anger about her affair, shame about family reputation, and devastating loss of economic support and emotional connection that her success in America had provided, creating psychological challenges that required years of therapeutic intervention and family support. The victim advocacy work inspired by the case included programs addressing domestic violence in immigrant communities, educational initiatives about healthy relationship dynamics and nonviolent conflict resolution, and support services for families dealing with intimate partner homicide that created unique trauma through combination of violent loss and complicated feelings about victims' behavior that preceded their murder. The research into crimes of passion and newlywed violence examined Michael's case as example of how marriage transition periods created particular vulnerabilities when expectations about intimacy and loyalty were violated, generating insights about risk factors and prevention strategies that might help identify potentially dangerous individuals before their rigid personalities and possessive tendencies manifested in lethal violence. The policy discussions generated by the case addressed issues including gun access for individuals with rigid personality profiles, the role of premarital counseling in identifying incompatible partners or dangerous relationship dynamics, and the need for better cultural education about diverse approaches to marriage and fidelity that might reduce lethal conflicts rooted in incompatible expectations. The legal scholarship examining the case analyzed the boundaries between spontaneous passion and premeditated murder in intimate partner violence cases, using Michael's systematic planning and calculated execution as example of conduct that clearly exceeded acceptable defenses based on emotional provocation or temporary insanity, regardless of the genuine psychological trauma caused by discovering infidelity. The family therapy provided to Linda Carter addressed her complex feelings about her son's conviction, her struggle to maintain relationship with imprisoned family member while also processing horror at his actions, and her efforts to understand how her husband's authoritarian parenting and military household culture had contributed to Michael's rigid personality and catastrophic response to betrayal that violated his deeply held values. The community impact in Dallas neighborhoods where Marie Claire and Michael had lived included heightened awareness of domestic violence warning signs and the importance of supporting victims of controlling or possessive partners before conflicts escalated to lethal violence. Though some community members expressed conflicted feelings about a case where the murder victim had admittedly engaged in behavior that violated marriage vows and betrayed partner trust, the insurance and financial consequences of the murders included complicated probate proceedings to determine distribution of marital assets and life insurance benefits, with legal arguments about whether Michael's conviction eliminated his rights to benefits from Marie Claire's death, while also addressing the needs of her family in Haiti, who had depended on her financial support. The employment impact at Michael's former workplace included difficult conversations about how colleagues had failed to recognize warning signs of his rigid personality and possessive tendencies, generating workplace training programs about domestic violence awareness and the importance of supporting employees who might be experiencing controlling or potentially dangerous relationship dynamics. The housing market impacts in neighborhoods where the murder occurred included temporary property value decreases and lasting stigma associated with the hotel where the killings took place, creating economic consequences that extended beyond the immediate victims to affect business operations and property owners who had no connection to the tragic events. The long-term psychological research examining Michael's case contributed to enhanced understanding of how rigid moral frameworks and authoritarian personality structures could create vulnerabilities to catastrophic reactions when core beliefs were violated, advancing clinical knowledge about risk assessment and prevention strategies for intimate partner violence involving individuals with similar psychological profiles. The 10-year anniversary of the murders marked a significant milestone in tracking the long-term impacts of the case across multiple dimensions, including family healing, legal precedent, cultural awareness, and Michael's own psychological development during his decade of incarceration in the Texas prison system, where he had maintained consistent behavior patterns of discipline and emotional reserve that characterized his pre-crime personality. The commemorative events organized by victim advocacy groups honored Marie Claire and Daniel's memories, while also highlighting progress in domestic violence prevention and support services that had been enhanced partially in response to their murders, creating meaning from tragedy through systematic improvements designed to protect other potential victims from similar fates. The documentary film produced about the case attracted significant attention through streaming platforms, generating renewed public interest in the psychological dynamics of newlywed violence and crimes of passion, while also sparking debates about the appropriate balance between understanding emotional provocation and maintaining clear accountability for premeditated murder, regardless of intimate partner betrayal. The academic conference presentations examining Michael's case contributed to scholarly understanding of how cultural factors, personality structures, and situational stressors combine to produce catastrophic violence in intimate relationships, advancing theoretical frameworks for risk assessment and prevention strategies that might identify potentially dangerous individuals before their psychological vulnerabilities manifested in lethal actions. The interview requests from journalists and researchers were consistently declined by Michael, whose continued refusal to engage with public discourse about his crimes reflected either genuine shame that contradicted his earlier justifications or strategic legal advice from attorneys managing his ongoing appeals process, leaving questions about his true psychological state and level of remorse unresolved after a decade of incarceration. The relationship between Linda Carter and her imprisoned son had evolved into monthly visitation routine, characterized by careful avoidance of direct discussion about the murders, their conversations focusing instead on mundane prison experiences and family news that allowed maintenance of emotional connection, while protecting both parties from confronting the devastating reality of his permanent incarceration for brutal crimes that had destroyed multiple lives. The financial restitution ordered by the court remained largely unpaid given Michael's lack of earning capacity in prison, creating ongoing frustration for victim families who saw the uncollected debt as symbol of incomplete justice, while also recognizing that no monetary compensation could truly address the irreplaceable loss of their loved ones or heal the psychological trauma caused by the murders. The parole eligibility that would never arrive due to his life sentence without possibility of release meant that Michael would spend his remaining decades in prison, regardless of any rehabilitation or remorse he might eventually develop. His permanent removal from society, representing the criminal justice system's determination that his crimes warranted complete and perpetual incapacitation. The cultural analysis of the case within Haitian American communities continued to generate difficult conversations about arranged marriage traditions, female sexual autonomy, and the ways that traditional values could create dangerous pressures for women navigating between family expectations and personal desires in American contexts, where individual freedom was culturally valued but not always accessible to immigrant populations facing economic and social pressures. The legacy impact on domestic violence prevention programs included enhanced screening for rigid personality traits and possessive behaviors during relationship counseling, recognition that seemingly successful and controlled individuals could pose serious danger when core beliefs about loyalty were violated, and development of safety planning protocols for individuals considering ending relationships with partners who demonstrated inflexible thinking or extreme reactions to perceived betrayal. The ongoing research into crimes of passion examined how Michael's case illustrated the deadly combination of cultural factors, personality vulnerabilities, and situational triggers that could transform otherwise law-abiding individuals into killers when circumstances violated deeply held values about marriage and loyalty, contributing to refined understanding of intimate partner homicide risk factors that extended beyond traditional markers like prior violence or substance abuse. The memorial scholarship established in Marie Claire's name supported nursing students from Haiti pursuing American education, transforming her tragedy into opportunity for other young women seeking the kind of professional success and economic security that she had achieved before her life was cut short by violence that emerged from the complex intersection of cultural expectations, relationship dynamics, and one man's inability to process betrayal without resorting to lethal revenge. The support network for Daniel Brooks's family included connections with other families who had lost loved ones to intimate partner violence, creating community among survivors who understood the particular trauma of losing family members to murders that occurred in contexts of relationship conflicts where victim behavior was sometimes questioned or judged by outsiders who failed to understand that no personal choices justified execution without trial or due process. The policy advocacy inspired by the case continued to push for enhanced gun access restrictions for individuals demonstrating rigid personality traits or possessive relationship patterns, though political realities made significant legislative progress difficult in Texas and other states where Second Amendment rights were prioritized over public safety concerns related to domestic violence and intimate partner homicide prevention. The therapeutic interventions developed for families of intimate partner homicide victims addressed the unique psychological challenges of processing grief when murders occurred in contexts of relationship, betrayal, or conflict, helping survivors navigate complicated feelings about victim behavior while maintaining clear understanding that personal mistakes never justified violent death and that responsibility for murder rested solely with perpetrators who chose violence over civilized alternatives. The 15th anniversary of the murders found Michael Carter at age 47. His appearance changed significantly by years of prison life, but his personality seemingly unchanged based on reports from corrections officers and psychologists who described him as model prisoner whose disciplined behavior and emotional reserve masked whatever internal processing he might have undertaken regarding his crimes and their devastating impact on multiple families and communities. The autobiographical manuscript that Michael had been writing in prison remained unpublished, despite interest from true crime publishers. His detailed account of the relationship with Marie Claire and his justification for the murders generating ethical debates about whether convicted killers should profit from their crimes or whether public interest in understanding criminal psychology justified providing platforms for perpetrators to tell their versions of events. The legal challenges to his conviction had been exhausted through multiple levels of appellate review, each court affirming the original verdict and sentence while rejecting defense arguments about evidentiary errors or inadequate jury instructions, establishing his life imprisonment as final and irreversible, absent extraordinary new evidence or constitutional violations that seemed increasingly unlikely after 15 years of unsuccessful appeals. The family relationships that had initially survived his incarceration had largely deteriorated over the years, with siblings gradually reducing contact and his mother's advancing age, making prison visits increasingly difficult, creating isolation that reflected not only practical barriers but also emotional exhaustion from maintaining connection with family member whose crimes had brought shame and trauma to entire extended family network. The personal correspondence that Michael maintained with a small number of supporters who viewed him as victim of cruel betrayal reflected disturbing lack of genuine remorse and continued minimization of his responsibility for choosing murder over divorce. When confronted with his wife's infidelity, his letters expressing self-pity and resentment rather than accountability or understanding of the permanent damage his violence had caused. The victim advocacy work that had been inspired by Marie Claire and Daniel's murders continued to expand through foundation, established by their families, providing support services, educational programs, and policy advocacy that transformed personal tragedy into systematic efforts to prevent intimate partner violence and support survivors dealing with loss of loved ones to domestic homicide. The research publications examining Michael's case contributed to enhanced understanding of how rigid moral frameworks combined with possessive attachment styles could create lethal vulnerabilities when relationship expectations were violated, advancing clinical knowledge about personality factors that elevated risk for intimate partner violence, even among individuals with no prior history of physical aggression or criminal behavior. The cultural impact within immigrant communities included enhanced awareness of the psychological pressures faced by women navigating between traditional family expectations and American values regarding sexual autonomy and romantic choice, generating support networks and counseling services designed to help individuals process cultural conflicts without resorting to deception or remaining trapped in relationships that violated their authentic desires and identities. The educational programs developed for healthcare providers, law enforcement, and social service agencies included specific training about recognizing warning signs of rigid personality structures and possessive relationship patterns that might escalate to violence when partners attempted to assert independence or violated loyalty expectations, creating enhanced capacity for early intervention before conflicts reached lethal intensity. The international attention to the case reflected growing recognition that crimes of passion involving recent immigrants occurred at intersection of multiple cultural forces, including arranged marriage traditions, gender role expectations, economic pressures, and the psychological stress of navigating between traditional values and modern relationship norms in societies where individual freedom was culturally prominent but not equally accessible across ethnic and socioeconomic boundaries. The memorial events organized annually by victim families created space for collective mourning, while also honoring Marie Claire and Daniel's memories in ways that acknowledged their complexity as flawed human beings whose mistakes did not justify their murders and whose losses represented genuine tragedy, regardless of the relationship conflicts that had preceded their violent deaths. The prison reform advocacy, inspired partially by Michael's case, addressed questions about rehabilitation potential and the appropriateness of life sentences without parole for crimes of passion, where perpetrators posed no ongoing danger to general public, though these arguments faced resistance from victim advocates who viewed permanent incarceration as appropriate accountability for premeditated murder that demonstrated complete disregard for human life. The psychological research examining long-term outcomes for intimate partner homicide perpetrators revealed that individuals like Michael rarely developed genuine insight or remorse even after years of incarceration, their rigid personality structures and self-justifying narratives proving remarkably resistant to therapeutic intervention or the natural reflection that extended prison time might theoretically facilitate. The media representations of the case in documentaries and true crime programs struggled to balance sympathetic understanding of Michael's psychological trauma upon discovering betrayal with clear condemnation of his choice to commit murder, creating narratives that sometimes inadvertently generated inappropriate sympathy for perpetrators while minimizing the devastating impact of intimate partner violence on victims and their families. The legacy impact on marriage counseling practices included enhanced focus on identifying incompatible expectations about fidelity, loyalty, and appropriate responses to relationship conflicts, with particular attention to clients demonstrating rigid thinking patterns or extreme reactions to hypothetical betrayal scenarios that might predict dangerous responses to actual infidelity or relationship dissolution. The ongoing support for Nadine Jean-Baptiste, who had eventually immigrated to the United States and built a successful nursing career like her sister had planned, included connection with victim advocacy networks that helped her process complicated grief about Marie Claire's murder, while also honoring her memory through professional achievement and service to others that transformed personal tragedy into meaningful contribution. The 20th anniversary of the murders marked a significant milestone in assessing the long-term impacts of Michael Carter's crimes across legal, cultural, psychological, and personal dimensions, revealing how a single act of violence had generated ripples that continued to affect individuals, families, communities, and institutional practices 2 decades after those fatal shots were fired in a Dallas hotel room. The aging of Michael Carter in prison reflected the inevitable passage of time that had transformed him from 32-year-old newlywed into 52-year-old lifer, whose remaining years would be spent in institutional confinement, his youth and potential permanently sacrificed to his rigid inability to process betrayal through civilized means rather than lethal violence that had seemed justified in his disturbed psychological state. The generational impact on both families included younger relatives who had grown up knowing Marie Claire and Daniel only through stories and photographs. Their understanding of the tragedy filtered through family narratives that struggled to balance honest acknowledgement of victim flaws with clear condemnation of Michael's choice to respond to infidelity with execution-style murders that eliminated any possibility of reconciliation, growth, or alternative outcomes. The legal precedents established through Michael's prosecution and appeals had influenced numerous subsequent cases involving intimate partner violence and crimes of passion, creating frameworks for evaluating premeditation and rejecting temporary insanity defenses based solely on discovery of infidelity, thereby establishing clearer boundaries around emotional provocation as mitigation for calculated murder. The scholarly literature examining the case had expanded to include multiple disciplines from criminology and psychology to sociology and cultural studies, each field finding different insights in the intersection of personality factors, cultural pressures, relationship dynamics, and situational triggers that had produced lethal violence from someone with no prior history of physical aggression or criminal conduct. The victim advocacy organizations that had been strengthened through work inspired by Marie Claire and Daniel's murders had achieved significant legislative victories, including enhanced domestic violence prevention programs, improved support services for survivors, and stronger legal protections for individuals attempting to escape dangerous relationships before conflicts escalated to lethal violence. The cultural conversations about arranged marriage and female autonomy within immigrant communities had evolved significantly over 20 years, with younger generations increasingly rejecting rigid traditional expectations while also maintaining valued aspects of cultural heritage, creating more nuanced approaches that balanced family connections with individual freedom and romantic choice. The technological advances in surveillance and monitoring had created new ethical debates about privacy in relationships, with Michael's use of tracking software on Marie Claire's phone representing early example of digital tools that would become increasingly sophisticated and accessible, raising questions about appropriate boundaries between legitimate concern and controlling behavior that violated partner autonomy. The therapeutic approaches to treating individuals with rigid personality structures had been refined through research partly inspired by Michael's case, developing more effective interventions for helping clients develop cognitive flexibility and emotional regulation skills that might prevent catastrophic reactions when reality violated deeply held expectations or core beliefs about loyalty and commitment. The prison conditions that Michael had experienced over 20 years reflected broader trends in American mass incarceration, with overcrowding, limited rehabilitation programming, and aging infrastructure, creating environments that prioritized containment over meaningful reform or personal growth. His disciplined adaptation to these harsh realities demonstrating resilience while also raising questions about the purposes and effectiveness of extended incarceration. The financial costs of Michael's crimes extended far beyond the immediate victims, to include extensive criminal justice system resources, long-term incarceration expenses exceeding several $millions over 20 years, and economic impacts on families who had lost wage earners and community members who had contributed professionally and socially before their lives were violently ended. The international comparisons examining how different legal systems addressed crimes of passion revealed significant variation in sentencing practices and philosophical approaches to balancing accountability with understanding of emotional provocation. With Michael's life sentence without parole representing particularly harsh outcome compared to some European jurisdictions, where similar crimes might receive shorter sentences with possibility of eventual release. The memorial legacy of Marie-Claire, Jean-Baptiste, and Daniel Brooks lived on through scholarship programs, victim advocacy initiatives, and educational efforts that transformed their deaths into catalysts for positive change, ensuring that their lives were remembered not only for the tragic circumstances of their endings, but also for the meaningful improvements in violence prevention and victim support that emerged from comprehensive responses to their murders. The relationship dynamics that had led to the murders continued to resonate with contemporary audiences who recognized familiar patterns of cultural pressure, relationship dissatisfaction, infidelity, and male possessiveness that characterized many intimate partnerships, creating opportunities for education about healthy relationship skills and nonviolent conflict resolution that might prevent similar tragedies in future generations. The questions about forgiveness and redemption that Michael's case raised remained unresolved after 20 years, with some religious and therapeutic communities arguing for possibility of genuine transformation and eventual release, while victim advocates and legal scholars maintained that premeditated murder of intimate partners warranted permanent incarceration, regardless of subsequent remorse or rehabilitation that perpetrators might achieve. The ongoing monitoring of intimate partner homicide statistics revealed that cases like Michael's occurred with disturbing regularity across demographic groups and cultural contexts, suggesting that the psychological and social factors that had produced his violence represented broader patterns that required sustained attention from researchers, policymakers, and communities committed to preventing domestic violence and protecting vulnerable individuals from partners whose rigid personalities and possessive tendencies posed lethal risks. 25 years after Michael Carter murdered his wife Marie-Claire Jean-Baptiste and her lover Daniel Brooks in a Dallas hotel room, the case continues to serve as a powerful reminder of the devastating consequences when rigid personality structures, cultural pressures, relationship conflicts, and lethal violence intersect in ways that destroy multiple lives while generating lasting impacts on families, communities, and institutional practices dedicated to preventing intimate partner homicide. The Arjun Malhotra Foundation, wait, that's incorrect. The Marie-Claire Jean-Baptiste Memorial Foundation has become an internationally recognized institution that has directly assisted over 2,000 families affected by intimate partner violence, while also funding research, educational programs, and policy advocacy that have contributed to measurable improvements in domestic violence prevention, victim support services, and criminal justice responses to relationship-based homicides across multiple jurisdictions and cultural contexts. The legislative achievements inspired by advocacy work following Marie-Claire and Daniel's murders include enhanced protective order systems, improved firearm restrictions for individuals demonstrating intimate partner violence risk factors, mandatory domestic violence training for law enforcement and judicial personnel, and expanded funding for victim services and prevention programs that address root causes of relationship violence before conflicts escalate to lethal intensity. The technological innovations in risk assessment and safety planning have incorporated lessons from Michael's case regarding the warning signs of rigid personality structures and possessive relationship patterns, creating screening tools that help identify potentially dangerous individuals before their psychological vulnerabilities and moral rigidity manifest in violence against partners who violate expectations or attempt to assert independence. The cultural evolution within immigrant communities has reflected growing recognition that traditional arranged marriage practices must be balanced with individual autonomy and emotional compatibility, creating more nuanced approaches that honor cultural heritage while also protecting vulnerable individuals from relationships that violate their authentic desires or trap them in partnerships with controlling partners who view loyalty as absolute requirement, justifying violence when betrayed. The therapeutic interventions for families affected by intimate partner homicide have been significantly enhanced through research and practice development, inspired partly by responses to Marie Claire and Daniel's deaths, creating specialized approaches that address the unique trauma of losing loved ones to relationship violence, while helping survivors navigate complicated feelings about victim behavior and perpetrator motivations. The prison reality for Michael Carter at age 57 represents permanent consequence of his choice to respond to betrayal with murder rather than divorce, his remaining years destined to be spent in institutional confinement, where his disciplined personality continues to serve him well in navigating harsh environment, while his rigid moral framework apparently prevents genuine insight into the devastating harm his violence caused to multiple families who lost beloved members to his calculated execution. The ongoing academic research examining Michael's case continues to generate insights about how personality factors, cultural influences, and relationship dynamics combine to produce intimate partner violence, contributing to theoretical frameworks that inform prevention strategies, risk assessment tools, and therapeutic interventions designed to identify and address dangerous patterns before they escalate to lethal outcomes. The victim advocacy movement that was strengthened through work honoring Marie Claire and Daniel's memories has achieved remarkable success in raising awareness about intimate partner violence, supporting survivors, and pushing for systemic changes that protect vulnerable individuals while holding perpetrators accountable for choosing violence over civilized alternatives when confronting relationship conflicts or partner behaviors that violate expectations. The international cooperation on intimate partner violence prevention has been enhanced through networks and initiatives that share research findings, best practices, and policy innovations across cultural and jurisdictional boundaries, creating more effective global responses to relationship violence that recognizes both universal patterns and culturally specific factors that influence risk and require tailored interventions. The memorial scholarships and programs established in Marie Claire's name continue to support young Haitian women pursuing nursing, education, and professional development in the United States, transforming her tragedy into opportunities for others, while honoring her memory through investments in the kind of success and contribution that she had achieved before her life was violently ended by husband who viewed her betrayal as justifying execution. The legacy of Daniel Brooks lives on through fitness and wellness programs that honor his commitment to helping others achieve health goals while also incorporating education about healthy relationships and nonviolent conflict resolution, ensuring that his memory includes both acknowledgement of his professional contributions and honest recognition of the poor judgment that placed him in dangerous situation, where his life was ended by jealous husband. The relationship that Linda Carter maintained with her imprisoned son gradually diminished over the years as her own health declined and the emotional burden of supporting convicted murderer became unsustainable, creating painful illustration of how violent crimes destroy not only immediate victims, but also damage families across generations, leaving permanent scars that no amount of time can fully heal in a tragedy that transformed wedding celebration into funeral and love into lethal violence.